The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss. Recently, in adapting these chapters from 100 More Orchestration Tips, I've been focusing a lot on percussion and brass. Let's jump back to the woodwinds for a very important tip about a member of the oboe family that's often misunderstood. The English horn is not just a lower oboe. The strength and character of its registers have been optimized in different ways. I wish that more developing orchestrators used English horn in their scoring. I tend to see it much less frequently than it deserves, and there's so much more to share about it. Nevertheless, when it does appear, it's sometimes scored in exactly the same way as the oboe, assuming a general strength and projection in its upper-middle range, and avoiding notes below written low D. Middle register passages are put forward into textures to compete with and complement brass instruments, very much the same as oboes with trumpets. So there's some room here for the player's perspective, that the oboe and English horn are decidedly not the same instrument in two different sizes. In Chapter 15 of 100 Orchestration Tips, I touch on some of the reasons for this. The English horn is optimized to favor its lower range, similar to a bassoon, so that to some degree, its strongest and most characteristic range is more like an octave below that of the oboes than its perfect fifth transposition might suggest. But let's expand on the differences now, register by register, so that you can score English horn at its strongest rather than as just a lower adjunct to the oboe family. Starting at the very bottom, it's interesting that the English horn's written range lacks the low B flat, instead ending in a low B3, sounding E3. This is an echo from older standards of instrument building, in which the original oboe also lacked the low B flat. It's just that no strong need has been felt to add that written note to the English horn. In the case of the oboe, the low B flat may have been a kind of stabilizing factor, but there's no such need for the English horn. As mentioned before, its construction puts more weight and control on the lower range, similar in some ways to a bassoon. The result is a gorgeous, rich, pungent low register, with more natural control afforded to the player, ideal for soloing, of which the repertoire is rampant. This excerpt from The Three-Cornered Hat by Manuel de Falla would be quite difficult to play on the standard oboe in the same written register. Just as it would be a mistake to think of the English horn as nothing more than a lower oboe, it would be an equal mistake to presume that it should only be played in solos on its lowest notes. Its middle register is just as useful to me as an orchestrator, in both solo and ensemble scoring. A rich, earthy quality inhabits the range from A4 to G5, that conveys emotions of tenderness, good humor, and even slyness in the right context. What's more, the little mini-register of written F3 to B4 covers the entire area of the standard oboe's more difficult range of concert B-flat 3 to E4. If there's something over that concert range of notes that has to be expressed with the most delicate of nuanced playing, then it's a relatively simple job for the English horn player, rather than a minefield for the oboist. Oboists find the English horn generally more easy to play throughout, especially in terms of articulation and breathing. It's more of a welcome auxiliary to assign, rather than a somewhat dreaded auxiliary like the bass oboe. Notes speak more naturally, needing less support, especially in the high register, where oboe notes require more push. All the same, the downward scaling of the English horn's range comes at a price. Players find it a little annoying and pointless to hang out in the high register for no good reason. The occasional high C6 and D6 are perfectly possible, of course, and show up from time to time in big orchestral tutis. But high solos are rare for good reason. The equivalent concert pitch notes are so much more fluid and accessible for standard oboe as to be superfluous on English horn. Occasionally, though, high English horn can express a kind of lonely pensiveness that's more stark and less generous than oboe in that concert range. English horn is sometimes only trotted out for the occasional solo, after which the player will have nothing to do, or may be asked to switch back to oboe. But English horn is just as useful as an ensemble instrument for an experienced orchestrator. The works of Holst, Stravinsky, and Ravel all attest to that. In dynamically soft to medium loud scoring, English horn balances pretty well on a note-for-note basis. But in loud passages, it's better to double the English horn's part with another instrument of a similar range, like clarinet or tenor register bassoon. The larger the orchestra, the more difficult the task of projection, as the mellow timbre of the English horn tends to get absorbed by the instruments around it, and by the stage itself. As I was told by a helpful oboist. I have never been told less English horn. One last little tip about the English horn. While it's terrific as the bottom note of a harmony with 2 or 3 oboes, it's just as useful when added to a bassoon chorale. The timbre blends in beautifully together with the lower instruments, tempering their rough edges and providing a smoother, less strained-sounding upper or doubling voice. During the period when Berlioz was revising his magnum opus, the Symphonie Fantastique, he took some time out to compose the Robroy Overture, which I've used as the framing music for this video. While Berlioz seems to have not thought very much of this effort, even plundering some of its thematic content for his programmatic viola concerto, Harold in Italy, it still shows a great deal more intuitive use of the English horn than its Romantic-era debut in the Symphonie Fantastique. Berlioz not only writes the extended solo for the instrument that we looked at a few minutes ago, but also works the English horn into the general fabric of the music, without having it transfer back to second oboe. I especially like the section that follows the solo, in which the English horn line carries the top of an octave melody. Then a wind chorale, doubled throughout by first flute. It gives the theme a beautifully original character of tone. Let's do a little extended score reading of that passage as a way of closing out this tip. For an in-depth introduction to the English horn, click on the link in the information below to watch a free video chapter from my Orchestration 103 course on Mac Pro Video. You can watch illustrations of range and strengths of register, subtleties of timbre, orchestral roles, alliances with other instruments, plus demonstrations by top orchestral musicians, and score reading samples accompanied by symphony orchestras. This isn't a plug. You can watch a free preview about any instrument in my courses anytime you need some practical reference. Whatever it takes, just get better at your scoring any way you can.